If you're married and in ministry, how can a better understanding of emotional safety improve both your marriage and your ministry? In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Trevor Hislop, counselor, marriage and family therapist, and ministry coach at PastorServe. Trevor brings a unique perspective because not only is he a certified marriage and family therapist, but he's also served in pastoral ministry in the local church for 20 years. Together, Trevor and I explore how some of the tendencies we have around vulnerability and risk in ministry settings can unknowingly transfer into the relationship we have with our spouses. Trevor helps us identify and address some of these challenges so that we can have healthier marriages and healthier ministries. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another insightful episode of FrontStage BackStage. I am your host, Jason Daye. And if you've been with us, you know that every single week I get the distinct privilege, the honor really, to sit down with a trusted ministry leader and dive into a conversation, all in an effort to help you and ministry leaders just like you embrace a healthy, sustainable rhythm for both life and ministry. And we are proud to be a part of the PastorServe network. And not only do we have a conversation, do we release an episode every single week, but our team also creates an entire toolkit that complements this conversation. And in that toolkit, you will find a lot of additional resources, including a ministry leader's growth guide. And this is designed to help you and the leadership at your local church to grow more deeply. And so we encourage you to take your team through that toolkit, watch the video, listen to the podcast, and then meet together and work through that growth guide. It's a great tool. It's free, and we just provide this for our audience. So be sure to check that out at pastorserve.org/network. And then also at PastorServe, we love to come alongside of pastors and ministry leaders and walk with you, help you navigate some of the challenges you might be facing in life and ministry. And we are offering a complimentary coaching session. And you can find out more details about that at pastorserve.org/free session. So be sure to check that out. Now, if you're following us and watching along on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and take a moment to drop your name and the name of your church in the comments below. We absolutely love getting to know our audience better, and our team will be praying for you and for your ministry. Now, whether you're joining us on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever podcast platform you might be listening along on, please take time to follow and subscribe so you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. And today we have a wonderful conversation for you. At this time, I'd like to welcome Trevor Hislop to the show. Trevor, welcome.
Thank you, Jason. It is a privilege to be with you today.
Yeah, it's awesome, bro. Now, what's cool for everyone who doesn't know, Trevor is not just a trusted ministry leader and an expert in the field of marriage and family therapy, but he's also a friend, and he's also a team member of mine at PastorServe. And so it's always awesome to hang out with you, brother. And thank you for making time to talk about a really important topic that many of us in ministry are very familiar with. You and I both, having served in pastoral ministry for 2 decades at least ourselves. And then we also both happen to be married, right? And so marriage, not everyone in ministry is married, and we understand that. Right. And we don't think that you have to be married, obviously, to be in ministry. There are lots of amazing single people who are serving in the kingdom. Very grateful for all of them. But today we're going to be tackling this topic of marriage and ministry. There's a lot that we experience in marriage, whether you're in ministry or not. There's a lot that you experience in ministry, whether you're married or not. You put those two together, and there's some unique things that we have the opportunity to address. And Trevor, you and your work at PastorServe, and even beyond PastorServe, you work with married couples often, and as a counselor, as a therapist, and you spend a lot of time. You do some intensive time with married couples who are in ministry. And so you have seen firsthand, not only have you experienced them yourselves, but you have the opportunity in a setting, a therapy setting, as a counselor, to really engage with couples. And so you've seen a lot. One of the things I think that all of us in ministry can say is that Ministry, oftentimes we feel like we're living in a glass house. This has
Yeah.
been talked about often, right? Because we are in ministry.
Mhm.
We're preaching, we're teaching, we're serving, we're trying to encourage people, and so oftentimes we feel like we are always on, right? And we always have to have
Yeah.
everything dialed in and figured out, and to encourage others. And so that presents some challenges in ministry. That specifically
Mhm.
presents some challenges in our marriages as well, because of some of those feelings that we might have. So, Trevor, can you help us out? Let's dive in there, because I think that's a topic we all would resonate with. Help us
Right.
kind of process through how that is oftentimes shows up as a challenge in our marriages.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. You mentioned we live in this glass house. We see that in the realm and the role of ministry leader. And as you shared all the years that I've done it, been in that role of ministry leader, we experience that firsthand, just like those who are watching or listening to this podcast. So as you talk about the idea of challenges to ministry leaders, there are many things. I want to just maybe start with talk about the individual challenges, and then talk about or identify that within that specific relationship of a couple who's doing ministry as a married couple. So when we think about, like, I know I've heard this many times. In fact, I remember hearing this in grad school. The statement, "Never let them see you sweat." Right? Have you ever heard that
Right.
before?
Yeah.
Never let them see you sweat. Right? It's this idea of what's happening on the outside, right, needs to be different than what's happening on the inside. You're freaking out on the inside, right? Like, I remember the first time I had to preach, I was freaking out. I remember this idea of, like, don't let them see you sweat, right? And that's like a belief or like a mantra, I think, that we carry around as ministry leaders. As you mentioned a little bit, so in my work as a marriage and family therapist, I work with a lot of individuals at Pastor Serve. I also work in a private practice in the state of Florida. And what I often see with pastors when they step into my office here locally, or when I'm on video calls with them, is they're very, very guarded. They find it very, very difficult to be real and open and honest. And somewhere along the way, they started to believe some other mantras, a belief like, my job is to care for other people. My job is to carry their burdens. It's not their job to carry mine,
Mm.
right? But it's my job to carry theirs. Or beliefs like, nobody would ever understand what I'm going through. Nobody knows what it's like to be me. Nobody knows the burdens that I carry as a pastor in the local church. Right? They ultimately get to a place of a belief of the idea that people are just not trustworthy. Right? This mantra of don't trust anyone. So we get into this realm of, so how do you take that into the marriage? How do you take that into the couple who's doing ministry? And we have other beliefs, other mantras. Like there's this idea of healthy marriages require perfection. Like
Yeah.
healthy marriages, there's no argument, there's no fighting. We're always smiling, we're always happy, we're living the fairy tale, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so then married couples who are in ministry, they buy into that, this idea, this need of, like, we need to be perfect, right? They have this idea, it's this belief, it's our job to model for everybody what it's like to be good Christians in a good marriage. And it increases this guardedness back to this idea of never let them see you sweat, right?
Right.
Always present on the outside. In fact, one of the things I love about this podcast, FrontStage BackStage, it's this tension, right, that we experience, and you've talked about it many times on this podcast. Couples challenged with this idea of this belief of, like, hey, if I ever had to admit marital struggles with my spouse, it would somehow be dishonoring to God. It might actually be dishonoring to my spouse.
Mhm.
Right. So the idea of,
Right.
like, hey, don't talk about it. Don't admit it, because if you admit it, it somehow might be unhelpful.
Right.
There's
Right.
this another mantra. I remember hearing this. Probably you have too. The fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so this is so common. In fact, just last week I sat with a ministry couple here in Florida in my office. And they said, I'm so sick of faking it.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from that fake it till you make it. Yeah.
Right.
And what we recognize is, well, first of all, the reality is marriage is hard, right? Across the board, anybody who's married, ever been married, marriage is hard, right? We also recognize that we don't have to be perfect. In fact, the reality is we're not perfect. We'll never be perfect. Ministry couples struggle like every other couple, and there's no exception to that rule. I don't know how many couples have sat in my office and told me they never fight, they never argue, they always get along. And then I ask them, what are you doing here? Why are you in my office? Right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Something's going on, right? But there's this incredible resistance to talk about these things in ministry couples. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. The reality is ministry couples are not immune to marriage challenges.
Yeah. So Trevor, how do we, when we're in ministry, again, feeling in this glass house, feeling as if we have to put on appearances in a way, right? Don't show any cracks, right? Because we're trying to encourage people to love each other deeply. We're trying to, we preach, I'm sure both you've preached, I've preached many marriage sermon series, right? Or sermons on marriage and encouragement. Why do we wrestle so deeply with this belief that we need to present ourselves like we have it all figured out, as opposed to a more of an openness? Not that we're airing all of the dirty laundry and just, using our congregation as our, therapy session, but how, why do we wrestle with that? And what's kind of the balance there? This idea of transparency and this idea of protection, and because we wrestle through all of that, and sometimes I think that it's like, well, we feel like we're doing the right thing. We feel like we're protecting our spouse. We feel like we're protecting our family. We feel like we're somehow, I know we get mixed up in this, feel like we're protecting God in some way, right? And God doesn't need our protection, but all of those things kind of mix and mash into this, Trevor. So how do we kind of navigate some of those thoughts, some of those feelings?
Sure. Yeah. So let me start with the kind of the foundation in all of this. And it's built around the idea of trust, of safety. Like one of the things that I talk frequently with couples, ministry couples, any couples that come into my office or I have conversations with, we're talking about the idea of what's referred to as emotional safety. Now, it's also often referred to as emotional intimacy, and I'll reference that in just a moment. But emotional safety is simply our felt sense of trust, our felt sense of safety with another person. And so somewhere along the way, for pastors, for ministry couples, we've had experiences that tell us people are not safe. Like people are not safe. And we whether that's been taught to us, whether we were interns or we started out young in ministry or later in life, or we went to school, whatever that is, somewhere along the way, we learned through experience and through the influence of others, people are just not trustworthy. But it's built on this idea of emotional safety. So let me just kind of dig a little bit deeper into this. Emotional safety is, it means when we have it, it's being able to be your true self with another person. It's the feeling that we can express who we are, from our hurts, our fears, our dreams, without being judged or punished for doing so. So it's establishing trust with another person, and feeling safe enough to be open and vulnerable with them. So we see this not just in marriages, we just see this in relationships in general.
Right.
And so for ministry leaders, even outside of the marriage, we have found it to be difficult to find people in our lives who are trustworthy and safe. And I'll share in just a moment of how that actually ties into and how that actually influences then the way that we interact within our marriage. But let me just a little bit more on this idea of emotional safety. So there are certain things that promote emotional safety, and then there are certain things that demote emotional safety. So let me start with the things that maybe are unhelpful or demote this idea of emotional safety. So when somebody were to share something with you, Jason, or with me, and if we were to respond in such a way that we were defensive by what we, by something they said to us, we were emotionally reactive. Maybe another way to say that. We might have minimized what they had to say or been dismissive. If we were judgmental, condescending, if we were criticizing, if we were belittling, any of those things could be received as, oh, this person isn't safe. Like I tried to share something with them, it didn't feel safe. So the opposite, with the idea of what are the things we can do to promote emotional safety. So the ideas of being able to sit with somebody and practice what we call active listening, to be able to be present with them, to paraphrase, repeat back to them what we think we hear them say, to be curious, to start asking questions, to be able to sit with them and create a space for them where they can be vulnerable and open and honest, where they feel like we on the receiving side of that can be safe people, that they can share these things that they might not share with others, again, because that idea of emotional safety. So I referenced emotional intimacy. And then when we think about, it's usually in the context of marriages, but in this idea of marital intimacy is the term we often use. And there's actually 6 categories to that. So there's physical intimacy. That's the intimacy we usually think of when you say, hey, I was intimate with somebody, right? Yep. We're talking about, so even within physical, there's sexual and non-sexual intimacy. So there's a difference between we've had a sexual experience versus, we held hands, we cuddled on the couch, right? So within marriages where that's appropriate, all right, there's physical intimacy. There's emotional intimacy, which is the same idea as emotional safety. It's what we're talking about today. This ability to feel like I can really share who I am and you can really share who you are. I can really get to know you and you can get to really know me, and it's safe on that emotional level. There's relational intimacy. Relational intimacy is this, like, you ever heard the phrase where, hey, that's my person? It's this idea that we relationally or kind of socially identify and connect with another person. That's that idea of relational intimacy. Spiritual intimacy, this ability to have meaningful conversations about the bigger questions of life and the way that we integrate our spirituality into that relationship. Ties to another one, emotional intimacy, like having real conversations about real things where we can interact in a way that feels intimate. And then the last is aspirational. Aspirational is like being able to share your hopes and your dreams with that other person. And ideally, as a couple, you share some of those hopes and dreams, right? It's aspirational in nature. And so the idea in all of this, and we're talking about intimacy, it's about being close and it's about feeling connected. And so if we tie this back to emotional intimacy, or I was using the term earlier, emotional safety, like it is an incredible part of what we just call marital satisfaction, right? The ability to feel like I feel satisfied and I feel close and connected in my marriage when I feel like I can trust the other person. I can share with them what I really want, how I really feel, and what I really think. In fact, one of our teammates at Pastor Serve, Rick Pierce, uses what he calls the emotional funnel. So, Jason, I think we had a chance together to experience that with Rick. And if Rick were here, he could share that. But what I love about this kind of framework of the emotional funnel, in very, very simple terms, it's this idea at the top of the funnel. We have conversations we can have with just about anybody. Like they're very activity-based conversations. And why do we have those conversations without anybody? Like with acquaintances, maybe even strangers. We can talk about the weather. We can talk about sports. We can talk about what we went on vacation. Why can we do that with just about anybody? Because those are safe conversations to have.
All right.
But if we start to come down this funnel, the idea is at the bottom of the funnel is safety and security. At the bottom of the funnel is intimacy. At the bottom of the funnel is vulnerability. And ultimately, It's this idea of it's the real me.
Mm.
Like if you really, really want to know me and me to know you, we have to come down this idea of, again, what Rick refers to as the emotional funnel. And so I love that visual, right? That we have to come down. And so what's required is for us to get to that place is increased safety. For us to feel vulnerable enough to keep going down this funnel, we have to increase the amount of safety that we have with this other person in order for us to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Trevor, real quickly,
yeah.
And this may be where you're going, but as you're talking, I was thinking, in ministry, as we've said, one of the unique things about ministry is that oftentimes we don't go as deeply. We're not as vulnerable, right? Because we're in ministry. So we're not as vulnerable with, our flock, or those people God's entrusted to us, perhaps. And so so we're practicing, subconsciously, perhaps, right? We're practicing, keeping our guard up to some degree, with, as part of our regular life in ministry. So can that then easily bleed over into our marriage, where we're so accustomed to kind of keeping our guard up that now we're keeping our guard up with our spouse? Is that what you see? Is that what we can experience?
Yes, absolutely. That happens. And we see that all the time. And so I love how, just even the way you described, we keep our guard up, right? We're a little bit defensive and we're guarded with those other people in our lives, whether that is, again, as ministry leaders, whether that is the congregation, whether that's the community, whether that's our staff members, whether it's our board members, right? We're constantly on guard. And again, back to why are we on guard? Because it doesn't feel safe, right? Like think of a boxer in a ring, right? They're going to put their guard up. Why would they put their guard up? Because they don't want to get hit, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's just part of human nature. It makes sense. And so you're right in that carries over into the way that we experience our marriage. So we're already at this posture, right?
Right.
So it's not like we just flip a switch when we get home and the guard comes down, right? We become so familiar and so comfortable with that guardedness, with that, putting our guard up. Some in like therapeutically, we'd call those walled boundaries. Like we set these boundaries where people are just not able to, we're not able to get to them and them get to us. Why? Well, the reason we put walls up is the need for safety. So one of the things we find in this, how it carries over into marriages within ministry, is the way that we experience. I mentioned earlier this idea of this need to be perfect, and the reality is we know that we're not perfect. We'll never be perfect.
Right.
There's always going to be some gap between perfection and us, right? And that is the gospel. We know how that works, right? We know the gap is Christ, right? He has built a bridge, right? He has filled the gap for us. But there's something that happens in us, just in our humanity, but specifically for us as ministry leaders. So there's this clinical term called cognitive dissonance, and it's this idea of essentially it's this gap between what we believe and how we behave. It was first developed in the 1950s, and it's caught on, over the last number of decades. A similar concept and often used in the same line of thinking is what's called the action value gap, which all of this is around this idea of dissonance. Again, there's this gap between what we believe and how we behave, and the dissonance is the pressure between the two, right? So we even know in the New Testament where Paul says, I don't do what I know I should do, and I do what I know what I shouldn't do, right? Way before the science of psychology, right? That's what he's talking about, right? He's like, I feel this tension. I feel this dissonance between what I know, what I'm called to do. I know what I'm supposed to do, and yet I don't, right? It's sin nature, right? It's just the narrative of humankind, but we carry that. And so for us as ministry leaders, the way that ties in, and I'll connect this to the idea of marriage, but as you talk about the way that we're guardedness with other people, it's back to this idea of we can't let them see us sweat, right? We can't let them in to know that we're not perfect. We can't let them know that there's some disconnect between the things that we stand on stage and preach
Mm-hmm.
and then the way that we live those out, right? This idea of this ability to practice what we preach. There's this friction of inconsistency, hypocrisy that shows up in our lives. And so rather than often confess those things, find somebody to sit down and talk about those things, process those things, that's part of our guardedness. It's not only to keep others out, it's to keep what's in from getting out.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this part of us that is constantly guarding ourselves inside of ourselves around this idea of dissonance. So like clinically, I see this all the time, like pastors who walk into my office and wouldn't dare to tell anyone except for somebody who's bound by law for confidentiality,
Right.
to talk about their porn addiction,
Right.
or talk about their relationship with alcohol, or whatever it might be. And they carry this incredible weight. So let me tie this back into the idea of what happens in marriage. So what happens in when we bring this into marriage, and just as you were absolutely right, can we see the way that we're guarded with other people carry over into our marriage? And as I already referenced, yes, we see that all the time. Like our posture doesn't change when we get home. But we don't only have it externally, we also have it internally. Mm-hmm. We also have these parts of being able to say, hey, if I'm a ministry leader and I'm supposed to be living out biblical life every day, I'm scared to death to tell my spouse the things I feel that are misaligned with God's word.
Right.
Like, I don't know how many times I sit with ministry leaders and they reference the verse, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, in prayer and petition, submit your request to God. It's a really difficult verse to absorb.
Yeah.
When you're anxious, right? It's back to this idea, well, what do I believe? I believe that I shouldn't be anxious about anything, but I am, right? So think about that with a spouse, right? Is it safe for me to come and talk to you about how I really feel? To be able to be open and honest with you, whatever's happening relationally and dynamically. What we see in ministry spouses is it's not just one member of the spouse, it's oftentimes both members of the spouse. They have their internally their own stuff they're dealing with, their guardedness about, gosh, back to Paul, like I don't do what I know I should do, and I do what I know what I shouldn't do, and I have that all swirling around inside of me. And then, knowing this external stuff that's coming at me as a leader or us as a couple.
Right.
But what we find is, rather than finding safety in our spouse, rather than finding this respite place to be able to say, hey, can we just be open and honest? Can we just be vulnerable? Can we just be real? Just to be able to say, hey, I'm struggling. I'm freaking out. I'm having a hard time. Whatever it might be, we find oftentimes the opposite. We find it difficult for us to be able to open up with our spouses in ministry because of, again, what's happening to us internally and our own ability to hear what somebody else might have to say while we're processing our own stuff. And then the externalized, and a lot of times it's expectation, isn't it? That's
right.
It's
exactly.
Expectations of, hey, so, sitting with a pastor who's struggling with alcohol, to be able to say, hey, I need to have a conversation with my spouse. It can feel very unsafe with that partner, particularly when for many ministry couples, some of these things can be detrimental. They can be detrimental not just in the marriage, but it can be detrimental to a vocation,
right? Livelihood,
right?
even. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. To be able to tell my spouse I'm struggling.
Right.
Yeah. And what do they do with that information? And then who else gets involved with this information can be very, very challenging. Yeah.
So Trevor, I mean, this is fascinating to think, and kind of, it's layers, right? And some of these things, I think most of us watching right now, listening along, probably resonate with some of these things, and we recognize, that we do, even though we may not want to, we are guarded more than perhaps maybe we should be, and that vulnerability factor exists, when it comes to ministry. But we may not always think about, well, that same guardedness happens, in the home even, right? Because we just kind of, that
Mhm.
bleeds over. So I think that's helpful. But the question is, if someone resonates with this, if someone is listening to Trevor share and they're like, this is exactly what I'm feeling. I do feel like I don't have that emotional safety with my spouse,
Mm.
right? I'm living that
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
What what can you do with that? I mean, it almost feels like, oh, I've gone this far. This is where, we've been in ministry and in marriage this far. This
Yeah.
is kind of the reality. This is just what life is, or, whatever.
Mhm.
But talk to us a little bit about the kind of hope side of this. Like, what are some things, practical things that we can help process or navigate this in a healthier way?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there are many things you can do to take healthy steps towards
Mhm.
establishing emotional safety. Um, so, at the foundation of it, we want to think about this from the internal first. So, if you've ever, you, Jason, or those who are watching have ever studied or looked at the emotional intelligence model.
Yeah. Yep.
Emotional intelligence, yeah. So there's 4 kind of quadrants in that: self-awareness, self-management, relation or social awareness, and then relational management.
Mhm.
It's interesting. It starts with self-awareness. It's this ability to be able to just start with self. Right now, we might tie this to say God as well. This ability to be individually to be able to say, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? Like, what am I going through? The ability to take inventory of that, assess that.
Mhm.
Invite God into that process. Pray about that. Right? There's always this need to start with self. And then from that, so if we think about the context of uh, ministry and marriage within ministry, think about how we might build emotional safety with our spouse. One of the first things we can do is when we've probably been doing this all along, the reality is we never stop doing it, is we're constantly taking assessment.
Hmm.
Is my spouse safe? Are my feelings safe? My emotions, is it safe to be able to share these things with my spouse? So we have to be able to take that inventory or take assessment of that. We also then have to be able to say, if we're going to, we know there's another mantra, but if we're going to see change, we have to be the change,
Mhm.
right? Somebody in the marriage has to be able to take that first step. And so if you've done the work of self and you're saying, hey, this is not working for me. Like, I have some things that I need to process. I need to increase some safety. I need to be able to lean into my spouse through this. Again, after you've taken assessment, how it's safe, where it's safe, what is safe, there's benefit of taking those initial steps by being that change. Take the risk. Sometimes it's calculated risk, but take the risk.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oftentimes what we find a next step is find a third person, whether that is a mentor, whether that's a marriage coach, a ministry
Mhm.
coach, somebody like me, a marriage and family therapist.
Mhm.
At some point, invite somebody else into the process, somebody to be able to help a couple walk through and work through increasing these levels of emotional safety. As a part of that, and this is a question when I never quite gave you an answer to earlier, was around how do we navigate navigate safety with other people in our lives. That includes the work of boundaries. And boundaries, I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation about boundaries,
Right.
right? But simply put, boundaries help us establish what's safe and what's not safe, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, what's healthy, what's not healthy, right? So, work on our own, work with a mentor or a coach, study. Through there's of course the book Boundaries and others like it.
Mhm.
An incredible ability to be able to set healthy boundaries. So, as you kind of reference, you've preached many times, as have I. There are certain things we're not going to say from the stage in front of our entire congregation about the sin that we might be experiencing, or the argument our spouse and I had last night, or the thing that happened in our family last week, right? Are appropriate levels to set boundaries within that as well. So the back to the first part in this is, it has to start with self.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the idea of how, go ahead.
Yeah, that's good. So Trevor, what is there? Let's say someone says, they're in ministry, they're in marriage, they've been doing this for a long time, and they're like, kind of, it kind of is what it is at this point, right? Like, we've learned to live this way. We're, it may not be the most fulfilling that it could possibly be, but lots of people have problems, lots of people have issues. Is there? I guess I'm just trying to find out, is there a place that people step back and say, hey, listen, this is something that we really need to lean into. Or because I find this, just as we're coaching pastors, not just around marriage, but around anything, there are times and places where ministry leaders were like, you know what, we've learned to manage life like this. Why dig into it? It could make there's a risk almost, we feel like there might be a risk, like, hey, I figured out how to cope like this, what I mean? Like, if we open up this Pandora's box, perhaps, then we've got to work through a whole nother thing. Talk to us a little bit about that, because in ministry, oftentimes that's a struggle, because we figure out how to manage, you know what I mean? And figure like, hey, this is the best for, our family right now. This is the best for the church, in our mind, this is what we're telling ourselves. We're not making any waves, right? We're just moving things along. So talk to us a little bit about that. And how do we really assess that? Because I was thinking, as you're talking about self-assessment and those types of things, I know, and you've probably had plain conversations with ministry leaders as well, where it's kind of like, well, I've learned how to cope this way. Why dig more deeply, right?
Right. Yeah. So I referenced earlier self-management, or you just added the terminology coping, right? So essentially it is coping strategies, coping mechanisms for whatever the situation you said. There could be a number of them. And sometimes it's within marriage. Sometimes it's just within our role as a leader in ministry, where we do get to that place. Again, I've learned to manage, or I've learned to cope. And so with that, as a part of the assessment, part of the inventory, there's a few things we have to be able to identify. The first is that a place that we want to stay or not stay? There are many people who just said, hey, I'm just settling in and I have no desire for change, right? So ultimately, that has to come from the person. If change is going to happen in our lives, it has to be our idea. Right, Jason, you can't make me change. I can't make you change.
Yep.
I'm not going to change my wife, Mindy. You're not going to change, your wife, and anybody listening, right? Like, we know that if change is going to happen in our lives, it has to be our idea. And so with it, first of all, okay, we've settled in. Again, like you said, all the risks. What if we take risks? What if there's challenges? So again, we have to be able to calculate, are those risks we are willing to take? As a part of that, and through that, really we have to be able to envision what life would look like differently. Like, as ministry leaders, we've become experts at vision casting, right? For everybody else, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, we've learned the art of vision casting. So if we could just apply those same skills to our own life, right? Like, what would life look like? I mean, vision casting, vision requires risk. Requires sacrifice, compromise. Right. So if we can start to apply that to our own situation in our own lives, that's a significant piece of that. As a part of our assessment, if we do determine that we are just we are settling, that there is more for us out there, then we start to take active steps towards change. We will able to, if we can see the possibility of a preferred future, we will work towards change. Yeah. And I often hear this with couples of, hey, well, doesn't it take two? And that's kind
Yeah.
of an interesting question,
Right. Yeah.
because the answer is both yes and no.
Hmm.
Because the answer to the no, it doesn't take two, is, again, if I want change in my life, it's got to be my idea, right?
Right.
I can become a better husband, right?
Yep.
I can do the work for me. I can become more insightful and more understanding, more empathetic, more trustworthy, right? I can do that work for me. And the marriage can see the benefit of it,
Right.
right? For my wife, or for for your wife, right? The same would be
Yeah.
true for a woman in the marriage. That the same would be true, right? So
Yep.
on one hand, it doesn't take two, but what we see the most benefit is when the couple can unite, right? When there is a common goal, when there's shared experience.
Hmm.
And that's what we see in marriage, the marriage ministry, the work of marriage in ministry, right? Is when the couple is able to share that vision, is able to take active steps towards it together. So I
Yeah. That's
talked about
good.
earlier the idea of aspirational intimacy. I mean,
Right.
that'd be a function of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's super helpful, man. This conversation has been so helpful, Trevor. As we're kind of winding down, I would love to give you the opportunity. You have the eyes and ears of a bunch of ministry leaders right now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
a bunch of them at all different places in life, in ministry, and in marriage for many. Um, what I would just want to give the opportunity to speak some
Mhm.
words of encouragement um, into the lives of those who are serving, and into their marriages, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. So first, I would say, and this is oftentimes, after having been in ministry myself, and Jason, you reference this, is we, that's my experience, was just didn't often get exactly what you're suggesting, Jason. You read this idea of affirmation and encouragement in
Hmm.
in a place that isn't tied to performance, right? Like, how many times we've gotten like, "Hey, good message this morning,
Right.
Pastor," you
Yeah.
know. But for those of you watching, those of you listening, I think as an extension of our team at Pastor Serve, we are just grateful for the work that you do, that you stand on the front lines, that you love and care for and carry the burden of those who walk through your front doors, who are there with you, who are serving alongside you. It is an incredible gift, and yet it's an incredible burden. And so I think the first I would just say is thank you.
Yeah.
As we think about our conversation today about getting real in marriage and ministry, my encouragement to you is a fewfold. First of all, challenge those beliefs that I talked about earlier, the belief of never let them see you sweat, the belief of we have to be perfect, the belief that if our marriage was ever unperfect, that somehow it would be dishonoring to God or to each other. This mantra of we got to fake it till we make it, and all the others that were referenced. I would challenge you to question those beliefs. And then I would encourage you to start small. In fact,
Mm.
there's a phrase we use in therapy, is small steps make big progress.
Mm.
Start small. And that first small step is the self-assessment we discussed. Just start by some internal self-assessment. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Are there people in my life that I feel that are safe? What steps might I be willing to take to work towards safety if there are people in my life or isn't yet people in my life,
Hmm.
right? Work towards steps of safety with your spouse, being the one who's willing to model it first. Take active steps towards building support systems of trusted friends and trusted advisors. In fact, if I just to speak about that, Jason, I know for our team at Pastor Serve, we do a lot of this work, don't
Right.
we?
Yeah.
Yeah, caring for those who are caring for others. I mean, Pastor Serve, it's caring for pastors.
Yep.
right? Walking alongside. And if we can be a support to you as trusted people in your life, creating a safe space, whether it's for you as an individual, whether that is for you and your spouse as a couple. There are many opportunities, right, within the work that we do at
Right.
Pastor Serve to come alongside and walk with you. And so in that part of inviting other people into the process,
Yep.
it's a critical piece. We can't do life alone, right? In fact, pastors, we talk about no pastor should walk alone.
Right.
And this is no different, right? No ministry couple
Right.
should go it alone. And so
Yeah.
we would love to be a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Definitely.
care
Definitely.
and support. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we have lots of opportunities for those of you who are watching and listening. We have lots of opportunities. This is what we do week in and week out is come alongside, as Trevor said, pastors and ministry leaders. And we have different opportunities for ministry couples as well. And we would love to engage with you. If you're listening, you're watching, some of the stuff is resonating with you, you'd like to talk more deeply with Trevor or someone on our team, you can jump on for a free session. There's a complimentary coaching session, pastorserve.org/free session. You can learn more details there. And you can just reference that, this podcast with Trevor, and we'll do all that we can to get you connected there. In that way, it's a great kind of first step if you want to have a conversation with someone and just kind of explore some of these things. Go ahead and check that out. And then, as I said, we have other opportunities at Pastor Serve to serve ministry couples. And again, you can just reach out to us directly. We can share with you some of those different opportunities, whether intensives or kind of retreats, marriage, kind of almost enrichment and encouragement type retreats, those types of things, whatever it might be. We're here for you, and we love and appreciate you. And I echo the words that Trevor shared as far as encouragement for you and for your ministry. So be sure to check that out. And then don't forget the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide, which will give you some questions for reflection, some different insights, different resources that were birthed from this conversation Trevor and I have had with you today. And you can find that at pastorserve.org/network. So be sure to check that out. Trevor, it is an absolute joy, brother, to talk about these things. I know these things matter deeply to you. You've devoted your life to this, to serving in this way, and we appreciate you. And you're an incredible member of our team, and I'm glad you could carve out some time today to hang out with us on Front Stage Backstage. So thank you.
Jason, thanks for the invitation to being with you today, and it's an honor, to be a part of the team at Pastor Serve, and a joy to walk alongside pastors.
Amen, brother. I appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you.
Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, Front Stage Backstage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.